I'm Al Spencer and I've written very short stories, and now I've opened a website and I've asked various people to come and read them for me. Now, I've known Carol a long time and she said she'd love to read my short story, which is Fluffy and Mrs. Barnipold Batternic, which is really for children and also grown-ups. So I'll hand it over to Carol and we'll listen to the story.
Fluffy was a champagne blue Persian cat of character. She had won all the major prizes at cat shows throughout the land, and one could tell by her deportment she knew she was a superior feline. She even purred with a musicality commented on by a notable musician of the day. Never was a cat more pampered and groomed. Now, one day, Fluffy was being transported to a show in a Rolls Royce by Mrs. Barnipold Batternic's chauffeur when an accident occurred. It was not a bad one, but the chauffeur had drunk a little more wine than he should and lost control of the car, and it skidded off the road. It became precariously tilted in such a way that when someone opened the door to help, Fluffy, in her cage, slid off the leather seat and bounced down a sandy stone incline to a stream at the bottom where the cage suddenly burst open, and Fluffy was unceremoniously dumped in the water. People who had stopped to help were more concerned with the chauffeur's plight, who they thought was in his death throes by the sounds emanating from him, and immediately rang for an ambulance. But it transpired that the death rattle they thought they heard was nothing more than his snoring as he slumbered peacefully on. The police, who also came, presumed his sleeping, along with the high reading on the breathalyzer, was the likely cause of the accident. The chauffeur quite forgot to ask about the cat while he was being charged, and he was put in a cell for him to have a blood test and sober up. By this time, Fluffy was wandering, saturated and bedraggled along the side of the stream, an emaciated shadow of her former self, dragging her long fur through all the mud and rubbish, while wailing pitifully for help. She delicately followed the flow, choosing dry areas to pad along until she came to where the stream broadened out and diverged into streamlets through the back garden of the old terrace houses. She then lay on a patch of grass in the heat of the sun to dry off. Jack and his younger brother Billy had been told to tidy the garden at the bottom near the stream. "What are we going to do with all this?" Billy asked while looking at a pile of scrub they had accumulated. "Tell me Dad and he'll set fire to it," Jack replied. "I've got some matches," Billy said, looking quizzically at Jack, not sure how he'd take it. "Gimme 'em. If my dad gets to know, he'll thump you and he'll blame me." "Go on." Jack stood watching while Billy suddenly wandered off after handing over his matchbox. He was just about to start raking again when he suddenly scowled and turned his head to listen to where he could hear Fluffy's strange meowing as she attempted to move. Her hair by now had dried and glued her down to the grass. He went to investigate, and he'd just found her when he heard his dad call out his name. "I'm down here! A cat's got stuck!" he shouted back. They all stood looking at the plight of Fluffy for a moment, then his dad began releasing her by cupping water and gradually loosing the fur. Finally, he held her to him, and she, being used to being handled, began to purr. "She's got a grand purr," he pronounced in his broad Yorkshire accent. "I've not seen her before. Have you?" he asked, looking one to the other. "Could we keep her?" Billy asked excitedly. "We might. Depends if someone comes looking for her. Could be a new neighbour's. She's a bonny lass," he said, smiling and scratching under her chin. That night, the whole family became involved in cleaning Fluffy up. And finally, after Mother used her hairdryer, she was as good as new. "This cat," she said seriously, "is no ordinary cat. Did it have a collar on?" "Maybe it came from heaven," Billy said, his eyes lighting up, trying to convey that he had found a solution to the seeming problem. "Cats don't come from heaven," Jack said, as if knowledgeable on the subject. "They come from pet shops." "Well, maybe we get them from heaven. You don't know everything," not to be outdone by his brother's intellect. "I think we'll have a look round the back tomorrow. Maybe there'll be a collar," Dad said, looking at the clock. "And it's time for you two to go to bed." There was the usual opposition from them, and when they asked if they could take the cat to bed with them, there was a definite no from both parents. That night, Fluffy was given a bed made out of an oak coat and enough to eat and drink to settle her. But most of the time she curled up on Mother's knee, who watched television, scratching Fluffy's chin so as to prolong her melodious purring. Later, when Dad came home from the pub, she turned off the television and sat by him at the table. "Did you get any news tonight?" "No," he answered, shaking his head solemnly. "It looks as if the strike's on." She shook her head and looked at him. "Doesn't anyone say anything?" she asked, as if slightly scolding him. "No, they're all a bit scared. We'll get strike pay." "That's not enough, Frank. We're already behind with the mortgage." "I know, love. We'll find a way. We always do." "Not this time." Mrs. Barnipold Batternic was furious when she heard what had happened and sacked the chauffeur as soon as she saw him. But this didn't solve the problem. Fluffy was missing and she was distraught. But it was too late to do anything. The next day she drove herself back to where the accident had occurred and looked over the drop and was sure she could see something that looked like the cage at the bottom. She was not dressed for scrambling down, but her inquisitiveness took the better of her, and as she pressed forward she began to slip, and gradually, almost as if skiing on the loose sandy slope, she descended gracefully until she reached the bottom, where she fell head first into the water within inches of the cage. Fortunately, she was more shaken than hurt, but as she stood up, bedraggled and wet through, she stared despondently at the cage, then sat on a large boulder, looking as if she was about to burst into tears. Finally, she picked up a hat from the water and wrung it out and placed it on her head, and almost, but not quite, saw the humour in the situation. After sitting a while, she looked up the slope and realised there was no possibility of her climbing back up the road again, and began walking along the stream, uncaring of the way she plodded through the water. After all, she thought, she couldn't get much wetter. She came to the place where the back gardens came down to the stream and saw smoke issuing from a pile of garden waste. She felt more than a little stupid when she realised she was being watched by two small boys and a man as she tried to present herself as someone quite sane who had befallen a tragedy. "Are you looking for a cat?" Dad asked, suppressing his inclination to humour at the ridiculous spectacle of a dishevelled person who was obviously a lady in distress. "Oh, I'm sorry for my state of dress," Mrs. Barnipold Batternic said, apologetically, not knowing how to react or what to say under the circumstances. She then proffered her hand, either for it to be shaken or to be pulled up onto the bank. As Dad heaved her up, her hat fell off, and Jack jumped down and handed her back. "Have you seen my cat?" she asked eagerly. "Yes," Dad replied. "Why don't you come into the house and dry yourself? She's there waiting for you." She smiled so warmly. She suddenly changed from an old stuffy woman and for a moment they all grinned at one another as the formality dropped away. "Oh, you've no idea how pleased I am. I've been worried about her all night. Is she all right? Is she hurt?" "No, she's all curled up and washed and combed ready for you," Dad said. "And she's purring all the time," Billy added. "Doesn't she, Dad?" "She purrs all the time." "That's my Fluffy," she smiled, and they went toward the house. When they went inside, Dad introduced her, and Mother bent down and picked up Fluffy from her new bed, then handed her over to Mrs. Barnipold Batternic, who had tears of joy rolling down her face. "I thought I'd lost her, and she looks so well." "Would you like to try yourself?" Mother asked, concerned. "Oh, I fell in the stream. I just couldn't stop myself. Oh, the car! I left the keys in." "Is it on the road?" Dad asked. "Yes, but I don't know how to go back," she said agitatedly. "Someone could just drive it away." "I'll go get it for you." "Can you drive?" she asked. "No problem," he said. "I'll have it here in a jiffy." "It's a big car, an automatic." "No problem," he said again while putting his coat on and going toward the door. "Take the children with you," she said jauntily. "They'll like having a ride. It's a Rolls Royce." "A Rolls Royce!" the kids whooped as they followed their father out, beaming all over their faces. It caused quite a stir with the neighbours as Dad and the two boys drove along the road and stopped at the house and got out. It was soon put about that they must have won the pools or the lottery. When they went into the house, Mother told them that the lady was sorting herself out upstairs, so they all sat waiting for her to come down. "It's a lovely car," Dad said, peering out of the window. "I suppose we won't see Fluffy again," Billy said mournfully, just as Mrs. Barnipold Batternic opened the door, looking more presentable. "You could come and see her. Oh, you've got my car," she suddenly declared as she saw it through the window. "Did you find it easy to drive?" "No problem," Dad replied with his familiar phrase. "Well," she announced, looking at them all, "I suppose I better be going. I'm so pleased to have her back. But before I go, let me give you something for your kindness." She then stopped and thought. "While you were away, your good lady was talking about the strike and how difficult it was for you all, and could go on for a long time." "Yes, it looks as though it's not going to be sorted," Dad confirmed. "I've got an idea, if you don't mind me saying. You seem to know how to drive my car very well. My present chauffeur, well, I've told him not to come back. Would you like to drive my car permanently?" "I would like that very much," Dad said with a big smile on his face. "Then you and the children would be able to see Fluffy whenever you wanted, and the pay will be better than what you're getting at the moment. I'll see to that." That night, when the children were about to go to bed, Mother said to Billy, "Maybe you were right about that cat." "What do you mean?" he asked. "Maybe it did come from heaven after all."